Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm really happy that I get to present the exhibition in Chantilly. It's a show I co-curated with Baptiste Reuilly, who is now curator of drawings and manuscripts at the Petit Palais Museum of Fine Arts in Paris. And the idea came from a conversation between a collector, philanthropist, who is very keen on collecting Watteau and doing everything he can for Watteau, Lionel Sauvage, who was recently nominated president of the Association of the Musée des Arts Décoratifs in Paris. And Lionel had a conversation with Mathieu Deldic, who is the director of the Musée Condé in Chantilly. And their conversation was around Watteau, obviously, and Lionel said, well, you know, Chantilly is a weird place, you can't land, so maybe we should bring Watteau to Chantilly so that we could display things together. And that was a really good idea on Lionel's part, which led to create the exhibition, starting with what's in Chantilly. Chantilly has the second largest collection after the Louvre in France regarding Watteau, 4 paintings, 6 drawings. Not the most beautiful drawings, but yeah, very interesting. And departing from that, we created the frame of the exhibition, the Worlds of Watteau. The frame of the exhibition is pretty simple in the sense that the space where the exhibition takes place is divided in 5 rooms. Departing from that clear division, we had to have 5 sections that would make sense in terms of exploring the worlds, meaning that there are some parts of the worlds that we didn't get to touch upon. We organized the different sections departing always from Chantilly's works so that it would make sense for the audience to see the things that usually are presented in Chantilly. And amongst those 10 works of art, we put things together so that we could get loans that would make sense in terms of discussing those themes. The themes are presented here, a picture of one wall in each section. The first one was dedicated to faces, so self-portraits, portraits, and types, which is something we can probably talk about eventually. The second section that you show here on the screen was dedicated to the drawings after the old masters, which is my favorite, and I guess a lot of people's favorites. Now that the show is over, I got that sense from people. The third one was dedicated to the consideration of the contemporary looks on Watteau's world, so the look on foreign people, and also the military scenes, which are 2 main themes of that section. And I'm yes, this is, section 4, about fashion, leisure, music, theater, a teeny tiny bit on theater. I'll explain later why we did not touch upon theater. And the last section here is the one dedicated to the Fête Galante, the most expected, I guess, from the audience, because the Fête Galante is the most important production that Watteau introduced and worked on, which has drastically transformed French painting in the 18th century. And I think that's my 5 minutes. Does that work?
I think you have a few highlights you could show.
I could show the highlights. Do you want them now, or should we do it later?
We'll give a few, just a few little taste.
The constraints that we had were, of course, the space, but also the loans. We were lucky enough to have like big loans from one collection in Los Angeles, which was one not costly, like carbon costly, does that make sense? Travel, so we took only that loan from outside of Europe. Then we decided to work mostly with Parisian collections, either private or institutional. And then we had only 3 other loans that came from Switzerland. So that was one other way to give more constraint, but those constraints were useful because they allowed us to really shape differently without this idea of being able to pick up whatever we wanted from whichever collection. So that was very useful in the sense that we managed to bring together elements that have never been shown together unless they were shown together in Watteau's workshop, which we're not sure of. That's the case for this part of the display. Here, where you see one painting that is in Chantilly, Venus taking Cupid's bows, for which we have a preparatory drawing that is known and another one that is known as well, which we managed to put together. I don't remember if I put a better slide for that. I don't think I did.
don't think so.
I don't think so. That's really bad. I'm sorry. That was one of the highlights, and also we got lucky enough to get the one of the very few drawings that reappeared ever since the publication of the catalogue raisonné of the drawings by Watteau, which was published in 1996 by Pierre Rosenberg and Louis-Antoine Prat. And this drawing was lent to us by a private collector, and when it all started, the private collector was really happy to loan it to us, so we were really happy to have it. And then, as we were writing the catalog, eventually we realized that the provenance that we were able to trace was good, but not complete enough, which happens sometimes. So we had a big hole in the 19th century, and it was impossible to trace the drawing in the 19th century, as it so often happens. But lucky enough, once the catalog was going under, I think, peer reading, rereading at the publisher, I went to the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, and for fun, I have very weird hobbies, went through the prints after Watteau and all the volumes, just for fun. And in those volumes, there are some lithographs of the 19th century that have been not unstudied, but less studied than other prints. And happened to be that this drawing was indeed engraved in the 19th century by an engraver called Charles d'Amour, which I had never heard of course. And I investigated slightly further about Charles d'Amour, and on that print was written 1856 from the collection of Michel-Ange de Chasselas, Saint-Ange de Chasselas, who is a painter who happened to be the owner of the drawing in the 19th century. So at the end of the day, when we gave back the drawing to the private collector who lent it, we were like, and this is your provenance. Now you have it, it's complete, almost complete. And should I go to this one as well?
Yeah, we can kind of briefly touch on the app.
Okay. This one it's a study case that I'm really happy to show you today, because we were lucky enough that the Fondation Custodia in Paris would give us those two drawings. So on the right is a drawing by Watteau in red chalk that is copied after a drawing now attributed to Rembrandt. In first place, as you can probably see, I'll try to zoom in, the drawing was attributed to Raphael twice. And the drawing has a pretty weird recent history because it was part of the Catalogue collection, that you can see here with the little stamp. And when it was in the Catalogue collection in the 1950s, at some point the heirs decided to sell some of the drawings. So they went to the Galerie de Béziers and said, this is a drawing that we have, can you look at it? And they were like, yeah, sounds like Italian 16th century. And we're like, okay, sure, sell it. Happened to be that Fritz Lucht knew that this drawing was going through the Galerie de Béziers, and he bought the drawing as 16th century Italian school. 2 or 3 years after, he published it as Rembrandt. So that's kind of a sketchy move on the side of Fritz Lucht, but still very interesting because he managed to gather both the drawings by Rembrandt and the drawing by Watteau put together. It was a bit of a piece of work for us because we did not really understand the scene. If you look from up close in here in the Rembrandt drawing, you can see that the bear is slaughtering another animal, but it's not really clear if it's an animal. I mean, it's an animal. It's not really clear what type of animal it is. And what was even more complicated for us is that in the Watteau drawing, Watteau changed the animal to be a big goat that doesn't really resemble a goat. So we just said bear eating an animal, question mark. Happened to be that in May, Martin Olin, who is now the head of research in the National Museum in Sweden, came to France, and I took him to see the exhibition together, and he was like, oh no, it's not eating anything. I was like, what do you mean? It's clearly eating something. It's like, no, it's not. Actually, that's very interesting. We have the drawing that corresponds to that scene in the National Museum in Stockholm. It is Titian's emblem.
Yeah,
Sorry, there's still some words that I'm trying to figure out. Titian's emblem. Actually, Titian's emblem is very well documented. It was published in 1568, sorry. And you can see that there's a motto on top of the representation that says, natura potentur arts. So nature feeds the arts, technically. And the way Titian chose to represent that motto was a bear licking something, like clay, probably, this idea of golem. And eventually you can see on the several drawings that Titian made about that this little bit of clay becomes a cup. And so art is the bear licking the clay to make it more likely to be faithful to nature. It's a bit far-fetched, but it works. That you won't find in the catalog because we didn't know, and Martin Olin gave me these elements later on, but I thought it was a good way also to show what exhibitions are made for. It's to display things so that we get to know further by getting more people involved, and I guess that's one good example.
Great.
Voila.
Terrific. Well then, Grant.
Grant.
Thank you very much, Axel. And actually, I think a drawing there that has Tessin provenance.
Yes.
Someone very well known to Watteau. So my orders when I began my project were really quite simple. Give the British Museum's very rich collection of some 60 Watteau drawings an overdue public outing. The last London show devoted to Watteau drawings, curated by Pierre Rosenberg and Louis-Antoine Watteau, closed in 2011. And if you want to find the last time that most of our BM drawings were displayed, you have to go all the way back to 1980, when the entire collection of our Watteaus were exhibited in a show mine was intended to mimic. Now, glancing through the catalogue for the 1980 show last night, I could see that we had some similar priorities, like a chronological structure, but I was much more struck by the different approaches we took, the different placing of objects and the different interests, different narratives informing the layouts of our respective exhibitions. Not to say the different information we put on the labels. These differences, I promise, are not just me being contrarian for the sake of it, but reflect changes to Watteau scholarship, which is thanks due to new scholars like Axel, who are inspiring new lines of inquiry. In the 1980s and the decades since, an awful lot of Watteau scholarship on drawings has focused on the tricky issue of dating the drawings, which is an important endeavour. But I do think that it has at times blinded us to other, arguably more significant, more interesting things to discuss. First, Watteau's love of drawing, repeatedly remarked on by contemporaries. Secondly, the reverence many of Watteau's collective friends and contemporaries had for his drawings. And thirdly, Watteau's highly novel, highly complex use of drawing, born out, I think, of this love of drawing. As the Comte de Caylus observed, Watteau did not routinely make preparatory drawings. Rather, he drew speculatively, making drawings as works in their own right, and only later would he consider using a motif devised in a drawing for a painting. Now, many drawings were only used for paintings years after they were made, and many were seemingly never translated into paint, so the drawing always has an independence free of any finished project. And so to capture all of these really interesting features of Watteau's drawings, I, in a word, made my show all about the value of Watteau's drawings, from which several broader arguments and themes sort of coalesced around the unfolding chronological arrangement. Arguments about the importance of drawing for Watteau, who was meticulous about preserving his precious sketches, but also arguments about the drawing's value for Watteau's collective friends, people of the calibre of Crozat, Caylus, and Julien, because they play an essential role in ensuring the survival and appreciation of drawings after Watteau's untimely death. I also think these friends played a fundamental role in cultivating Watteau's own reverence for his own drawings. It's clear that Watteau studied drawings he saw in collections like Crozat. Axel has just shown that brilliantly, as the Chantilly show. As the Chantilly show did. But I wonder if the influence of exposure to collections like Crozat's was much more profound. Whether seeing men like Crozat revere even functional drawings by long dead artists explains Watteau's particular preciousness about his own sheets. Whether the connoisseurs' careful treatment of their collections informed Watteau's desire to make drawings that existed as independent works of art. It's a suggestion that comes full circle at the end of my show when we see Watteau making sure that his drawings survive him by entrusting them to his collector friends. So, how are these ideas encapsulated in the space? I will give you a 1-minute whistle-stop tour for those of you who haven't yet made it to Bloomsbury. My opening is almost embarrassingly conventional, I have to say. The first room begins with Watteau's training. We see his curiosity, his willingness to draw pretty much anything. We see him meet collectors and copy their drawings. And out of all of this, we see the emergence of Watteau's highly novel working method and his obsession with developing, expanding and critiquing ideas on paper, often in highly experimental ways. We see, in short, Watteau building up the graphic archive, the corpus of drawings that will provide a repository of ideas for paintings. We then get to the green wall in the middle of the room, which was always going to be a highlights wall, showing off some of the best works in our collection. But I've dovetailed doing that with showing how Watteau then uses the drawings he's been steadily amassing. So I've brought together, with this trio here, 3 quite different drawings used for the pilgrimage to Kithra, perhaps the most famous of all Watteau paintings. And at the right, in that second grouping, 5 drawings that inspired figures in a painting known as the Divertissement Champêtre in the Wallace collection. I wanted to use a picture in London as a case study so that people could look at the picture as well as the drawings. And as we gallop around to the final wall, which is you see in these 3 drawings in the lower right, we find Watteau ever critical of his efforts, looking for new subject matter. We see his interest in the Italian commedia dell'arte and also the female nude. And then with about 10 works to go, we come to Watteau's death in 1721. But we're not done, because there then follows an exploration of the afterlife of Watteau's drawings, their translation into print, their importance for younger artists, and their diffusion across Europe as prints after them circulated and in turn inspired objets d'art.
Wonderful. It's tactically like we've all had a chance to visit. Well, come on, why don't you join me up here? And we can dive into a conversation, because having seen both shows and thought a lot about what you've done, I think the elephant in the room and the thing that was most radical for me was your approach in both cases to chronology, which Axel mentioned, because of course I've grown up in the past sort of 30 years with literature that's been very closely focused on chronology in the catalogue raisonné. Each entry is closely focused on chronology in an artist who had a short creative life, and that makes sense for catalogue raisonné, but when you're presenting something to the public, whether something is 1715, the first half of 1717, may not be as critical. And so we'll slide down. Let me see if I can get us at least to a bit of a background here. Oh, we've got a few extras. So we get an early and a late one to look at. First of all, Axel, so you almost completely abandoned chronology for the show. I looked for a date, and nary a date did I find, although there were some references to something maybe being early or relatively early. How did you reach that decision, and how was the implementation of that?
That's a really good question. How did we reach that decision? I had to argue a lot. It's very typical for people museum that are not always expert on a topic to get that thing that's can be taken from the show and it won't fall apart. Because as you said, 20 years of activity is not so much. A few drawings can be really dated, precisely, and a lot of them are just like randomly dated 1510, 1512, 1515, 1516. And if you start dating one drawing this way, then you have to date all of the drawings in the show this way, which suggests that in first place, you have a long text somewhere explaining to people that just came to see beautiful drawings and painting put together that scholars have argued for the past 30 years that maybe it was more 1714 when it was using the red chalk, but the orange one. And you know, like it's relevant, it's important to scholarship, but I felt that in the show, since it wasn't so much about chronology, but more about themes, as long as people knew that he arrived in Paris in 1700, died 1721, they had the dates, basically.
That's
So,
it. This is
yeah.
the period we're talking about, and we're not going to
Yeah.
split hairs as to where it
Yeah.
fits in there.
And also, as you know, it's pretty complicated, and I think, even for myself, I was like, I don't want to reread the whole catalogue raisonné. Like, and get
Well,
this
even
thing
putting a
like-
date is sort of staking a position on
Yes.
something, and who you agree with and who you disagree with. So there's
Exactly,
a lot
yeah.
invested in that.
Exactly, and also like be steady enough to give a date that you firmly believe in, which I have to say, even though I've been working on this for 10 years now, there are some moments where I look at drawings and I'm like, yep, I don't know, could be 1712, could
Yeah,
be
maybe we're all
1719.
wrong, and
Yeah,
you know.
I don't know, I wasn't there, there's no watermark, there's no steady proof, and connoisseurship is really useful to some extent, but also faulty. And
Yeah. And he's an artist who may have varied his style, and I think we had that issue with published in Master Drawings. Martin Eidelberg published 2 book illustrations that were done for Corneille's plays, and there was hearty behind the scenes discussion, and by hearty I mean people really felt very strongly about it because the association of this stiffer, delicate style with much earlier, based on what we know of what's been established about Watteau's chronology versus the fact that we know when these books were made, and they were made in 1713, 1714. So it does kind of box you in, but it also kind of sucks all the air out of the room if the preoccupation is that. But then Grant, you found a way to structure your show because you're working for one collection, which is pretty extraordinary. I just want to say, work at a wonderful collection in New York, and we have some beautiful Watteau drawings, but we do not have 60 that could be out on exhibition. So it is pretty amazing what you're able to pull off. But you found a structure within that because the material allowed that. And you do roughly date things and structure chronologically. How did you decide that was the way to do it as opposed to a thematic organization?
The initial plan was something more thematic, but I actually found it easier to evolve the thematic reasoning by drip feeding little observations bit by bit in each label. So the Gesamt was actually a thematic argument that you could follow around the show, but it was just structured chronologically. And I do think that for a British audience who, as we know, don't see that many Watteau shows, having dates that allow people to place things within the career can be useful. What I absolutely did not do, though, is lead on dates. Actually, this was a very rare example here where we can date a drawing quite carefully. This lovely drawing on the right has a watermark for the coat of arms, with the coat of arms of the City of London, which implies it was made here when Watteau visits between 1719 and 20. So that was a rare hooray moment where I thought I can be pretty certain. So I wasn't strictly chronological. There are things that do move around, but broadly there's relatively early drawings, there are mid drawings around the pilgrimage being completed in 1717, and then there are drawings that look reasonably late. I tended to give ranges of dates, so I tended to be quite, so that I didn't get too many angry letters. I tended to give ranges from the earliest generally proposed date to the latest one, which just, I thought, helps relate things to paintings as well. It just allows you to situate things within the career, but it was not a preoccupation. Largely because, and I'm going to get this excuse in early, I'm not a Watteau specialist. So this was not the sort of thing I think I could have contributed much meaningful to.
Well, and by Shaw's point, it's rather extraordinary, but when you work at an institution, sometimes projects come along and they land in your lap, and Grant has been working with Italian drawings at the BM for a while now, and with Italian prints for the future, but there were about 3 months to jump into this show, and how did you find a way in when you got that assignment, knowing the amount of time you had, given the insane body of literature that is
I think the difficult thing was threading everything together into a narrative, because if you're going to do that, every label has to make a new point. Every label needs to come together and form essentially an essay that you could read from start to top. And with Watteau, I'm sure, Axel, you had the same. That can be a little tricky when a lot of drawings can be reasonably similar. For example, we do have at the British Museum quite a few drawings of rather elegant ladies in rather nice dresses, enjoying the leisured life. So finding a new point with each drawing that is going to contribute to, say, a broader argument about the value of drawings, that was the tricky thing. But it's the more you delve down into the drawing, the more you look in particular at the materiality of drawing, things within the drawing can appear, and you can find that key, if you like, that allows you to grasp it to a broader narrative.
Yeah, and both of you chose sheets that are less likely. So, if anyone saw the RA show, of course, that is a sort of cherry-picked greatest hits kind of show, and which is sort of expected. I'm gonna hold on a second before I show that next one. So I just want to talk about, making the selection, including the drawing it right, this very late drawing. That's normally not something that gets an outing and that gets shown. But because of the nature of the show and the parameters of using the collection, you were able to show it. When you were making the selection, virtually you used the whole thing of the BM's collection, but what were your, what was your expectations of the audience who would come and see this, and how did that shape, first the show at the BM and then at Chantilly?
We do have quite a range of audiences at the BM. We have people who come specifically to look at our shows and read every label in sequence, and I probably shouldn't say this, but they tend to be the people I pitch my labels at, but we do have quite a few people.
That might be the people in this room as well. So.
We do also have plenty of people who walk out. Actually, we've had quite a few at the moment who've walked through the space because it's one of the few places in the museum that does have air conditioning. Yeah. So I think if we mapped visitor figures on a graph, whenever there's a heat wave, our visitor numbers.
Maybe 20 years from now, people are like,
oh, God,
I remember when I first got into Watteau, it was during that heat wave in the summer of 25.
Yes, this sort of zeffiretto, this nice cool breeze coming from the Fête Galante through the air conditioning system. What was a challenge is that if we are using our permanent collection, if we cannot lend, we do pretty much have to use everything you have. So you do have to, yes, play to the strength of what the collection has, but also there are occasional weaknesses or lacunae in types of drawings, and we can't ask for them. So then it becomes a case of just using every drawing you have to make, as I say, make each individual point that is going to come together to an argument.
Yeah, and how did that work at Chantilly? So, the expectation of the audience and the fact that you're approaching this thematically with juxtapositions and again, with lesser known works. And we'll take a closer look at some of those in just a moment.
I guess the way we thought about it was considering Chantilly's audience, which is, kind of the way you were describing, very regular people that would come and be very careful and thorough in the way they look at the show and read the labels, and also tourists that just are in the era, come see the castle.
Yeah, Chateau.
And they just pass by, but still the idea was, and I think that's interesting what you were saying about the labels. When we wrote them, the public service in the museum, do you say that?
Yeah, then probably the interpretation team.
Yes, exactly. Was also gave us very strict guidelines, which were one more constraints, obviously, but very useful. It was very short, very brief, and you had to give that narrative Like, and I really enjoyed doing that. It was the first time, and the idea that you have to write a story for each drawing and find the right angle so that it falls in your section, but so that it's understandable by everyone.
And is concise enough to fit in this word limit, and
yeah, I thought it was a really like fun game, fun word task, let's say. And I asked a lot of my friends that are not art historians what they got from the labels, if they were clear, if it made sense. And actually, like, I had one really good compliment on it, that it could be taken separately and it made sense and it was insightful, but it also worked like when you read them all. And I was like, okay, I think we did the job
because
in the
people
right
don't
way.
always, like us, go methodically. You know, I definitely sat in the BM for a while and saw people kind of dipping in and out and grabbing, you know, the drawing that caught their eye.
It's the challenge of describing what you're looking at and also inviting those conversations with
and
what's
not
inside.
talking too much about things that aren't in the room and getting people to focus. So there were some works though.
The quirky drawings, we didn't talk about them.
Yes, let's get to those. Let's get to those. Well, first of all, I do say, I think I said to Graham the other day, I feel like the label for this could have just said, "Look at those legs." So, you know, part of it is also just, you know, finding a way to engage the audience with something that is so beautiful and so masterful, but not in an academic way, but on an intuitive level. And that is both the joy of working with Watteau drawings and also the challenge is that, you know, you're putting those academic standards aside and, you know, you're really like, what is he even sitting on? Who knows? It's, you know, rather remarkable. And yet that drawing makes sense in an instant. You glance at it and you get it, and you get that body and that pose, and you could break down the number of strokes that are in that leg. And so how hard do you find it to kind of capture that pleasure, that enthusiasm, that beauty, when we're also charged with departing an educational narrative, as it were?
This was one of the drawings which actually was, for me, the hardest label to write because it's in the section of the drawing where I'm giving you the impression of Watteau building up this large corpus of drawings that he can then use for paintings. And in that section we see him using all sorts of graphic tricks to double the number of ideas at his disposal, to probe and critique the ideas that he has. And here we just got to a sheet which was not, as we know, used for any painting, and it's just a rather wonderful sheet. So I think with the label for this, I just talked about Watteau's curiosity taking him in new directions. I can't actually remember my label terribly well, but I'm sure it was very insightful.
Well, and I guess it also the point that not everybody's reading every label. Sometimes you could just come to a drawing like this and enjoy it, and that's an absolutely valid approach as well. So let's get to some of the quirkier ones, but also some of the stars. I just want to include a few from Chantilly. I mean, it was a handful of loans, but my, what a handful of loans.
We got really lucky.
Yes, indeed. And so how did you manage to get the show, this sheet of the three head studies of the young black boy from the Louvre?
We asked for 6 loans, got 5 validated.
Wow.
And the only ones that we didn't get, the only one we didn't get was an early drawing that represents a wig shop.
Oh, yeah.
I never really understood why we got this.
Yeah, I mean, this is the superstar, and the other one is kind of a weird curiosity where you've got these strange pin-leg stick figures in a wig shop. Who knows?
But then when we got the letter back, and was like, okay, sure.
Yeah, because this is the one you don't think you're gonna get, and then you do.
Yeah, and the way it's displayed also gives this thing of like masterpiece. It's really in the center of the wall. It's at the center of the section of otherness.
Yeah.
And I think it works. So, I mean, this is completely aesthetic, and it's just, you were talking about like intuitivity in the way you perceive the drawings, and it's super interesting on so many levels, but it's also so beautiful on the
Yeah,
wall.
no, I
It works
walked
so
in, I
well.
could not believe that was in the
Yeah.
show. That was just
I was really pleased with
fantastic.
that. So thank you to the Louvre.
Yeah,
again.
well, and it gets a wonderful balance
Yeah.
between the different works, and I think here's something that both of you were able to do, which is, of course, include examples from this wonderful series with a female model, sometimes clothed, sometimes not. Yeah, you can obviously see that Watteau didn't give a fig for furniture in most of these, if he even included it. In this one, he needed to, because to kind of frame this. But to be able to pull these out and put these into the shows and have this kind of high point, the kind of drawing that's sort of iconic for Watteau. And how, Grant, when you were finding a balance to the show, because you really had to use the whole collection and the full sweep, in terms of structuring these high points and pacing them throughout the show, how did that work for you?
Yes, well, as I said, I had the end wall, the green wall, where I had a few highlights, and it's a wall that I'd put in the viewer's mind from the beginning, because at the beginning I talk about particularly the pilgrimage to Cythera, then with the early drawings I mentioned Watteau getting the request to do it, and then you have to wait quite a while for it to actually get to the painting. So it did actually work as quite a nice break point in the middle, and then I resolved that I'd have Watteau's death, pretty much halfway in the wall on the other side. So there were key points that did stand out, and the other thing I was quite lucky I was able to do is use table cases as well, which just give a bit of visual articulation of when there's a break, when there's a dialogue across the space.
Yeah, and then Chantilly was all about dialogue, so you were able to gather a few of these from the sessions that they did, drawing with the models, Watteau and others, doing that. And so was that a particular goal to kind of unite a cluster of these because they're such standout works?
To be honest, I wanted one to be included to touch upon the nude session, but we didn't get a nude.
Yeah.
There are no nudes available.
Because I guess the PM was
Sorry.
busy getting their own ready for a show.
And also we had this thing of like getting mostly Parisian loans, so we thought that the Fondation Custodia one was the best for us because it falls in the fashion section. So it's perfect because she's getting undressed, she's not undressed yet. It's a very beautiful example of how Watteau carefully represented clothing, and it's also the introduction to the
whole
session.
series, yeah.
So it was just this
Like how it started, how it's
like,
going,
peeping in the hall.
Yes.
And then,
Yeah, the voyeurism.
Yeah, kind of. Like just opening the door and like letting people investigate further if they wanted to. But it was an interesting drawing to display and to talk about in the galleries because it's really the way they've been read by recent literature is mostly voyeurism, libertinage.
Libertinage, yeah.
Which are things that tend to be reread in a way that probably were not as, lubricious as they have been perceived so far. And I thought that was interesting to show it in the fashion section, more than in something of like, ooh, he drew a naked woman. Yeah, sure he did, but why did he do it? And when you look at the British Museum drawing, it's fully preparatory for a painting. So the way he looked at naked woman is the same way he was looking at the guy playing violin. Maybe one day that would be useful for a painting. And I don't think there was something really that erotic about it, more like it's not taught in the academy. We get a chance to do it out of the academy.
I need to look at a female model.
But yeah, if I want to paint a woman, I need to see a woman.
Yeah.
And I think it was more practical than the way it's been discussed in a very mid-20th century perspective.
Behind closed doors in a room. Absolutely. Sorry, that's the wrong direction. Let's get back down. This is a tricky business. There we go. Okay, so here's some unexpected works that popped up in both of your shows, and I'll start with Chantilly first. Towards the end of the exhibition, in a case, were these two small drawings at the right of this gathering in a park. Compositional drawings are not that common among Watteau's. We don't have that many, and these are barely known, and they're not, again, the kind of drawings that would end up in a cherry-picked best of, highlight show. But they provided a sense both of Watteau's range, but also this deeply interesting question at the end of, what if, is our idea expanding, or, is it growing? So tell us a little bit about the inclusion of these and the idea of Watteau that you created in the show that is a bit different, and I think reflects a lot of things that have come up, that have come to market, which are naturally mostly in private hands. These aren't the kind of drawings that an institution would necessarily pursue, and how that helped you frame a slightly different picture of Watteau.
That's a really good study case. Those drawings were recently bought by a collector, and they had been in a private collection last time documented in 1951, I think, so we only knew black and white picture. And the collector got approached by the family, they bought them. When he told me about them, I was extremely excited. I was like, that's really good news, because I really want to see them. I've never seen them before. No one knew where they were, so it was a blast to discover them. And they were, to me, they fell perfectly into place in the exhibition in the sense that they are unusual, new, and they say something different. As you were saying, the scope has changed. The way Kelus describes the way Watteau draws, I tend to think more and more is faulty, and consciously faulty. He's explaining fake things so that
he's trying to craft a narrative of this artist,
modernity, but like not too much modernity. Don't be too modern in the sense that you have to follow the rules of the academy. And then he's quoting on Watteau and saying, he's quoting Watteau and says that he did not draw any compositional drawings. Well, he did, and Kelus knew him enough to know that he did. There are really bigger sheets that are preparatory too. Like there's a finding of Moses in the École Nationale des Beaux-Arts that is a pretty big piece of paper, where you're like, well, if it's not preparatory for painting, at least it's a complete composition. So it was important for us to incorporate them in that way, and also show that the way he was a genius, I hate that term, but it makes sense, I guess, was not only in terms of aesthetic creation. He knew the way he had to work in terms of process to recreate the Fête Galante and find his way to become the leader of that type of painting. And I hope we managed to demonstrate it properly in the show. But there's really the sequence is also very useful, and the 5 themes really get to that point where all the things he draws in his life are meant to be used. Not always, not all the drawings are used, but he loves it, but he also knows why he loves it, because it's useful. So there's a weird paradox of like expanding the scope of the understanding of his drawing is also somehow killing the myth. It was so.
We've got to make space for some of these oddballs, some of these strange things, some of these things that aren't iconic Watteau, some of these things that wouldn't be in a greatest hit show. But when you're in a small space and you've got the opportunity to juxtapose things, you can pose these new additions and these questions about. Also when you're assuming an audience that's coming to the Chateau is already there, so they're going to look at the whole show. You really can take advantage of those opportunities to put in material that is a little unexpected, balancing say that great sheet from the Louvre or the Fondation Custodia.
Exactly.
Oh, we keep losing our. There we go. So Grant, let's turn to this counterproof in oil. So there are a couple counterproofs in the show. And including this counterproof in oil, which I don't know that I've ever seen exhibited before. I was sort of stunned by it. I thought, what? This is fascinating. So explain what this is, because I think it's so atypical, but also the choice to, well, I've got to use the bulk of these, and I've got to find a spot for this.
But this was always going in, because as you say, it is by far and away one of the most interesting sheets we have at the museum. It is an oil counterproof. Now, Watteau often makes counterproof of his drawings by wetting another sheet of paper, applying pressure, and essentially printing the drawing onto a sheet. So you have the image, a slightly fainter version of the image, in reverse. What Watteau has done here is do pretty much the same thing, but with wet oil paint. And wet oil paint from a canvas, if you just look at the top of the lady's skirt there, you can just make out on the slide the weave of a canvas. So he's painted sketch-lightly these two figures in oil on a canvas, and while the paint is still wet, to preserve the idea, he has pressed this sheet of paper against the canvas and taken the idea back. So you get this wonderful sense of the continual dialogue between drawing and painting in Watteau's work, that an idea presumably developed in drawing migrates onto a canvas, but rather than give it finality in a painting, Watteau wants to take it back. He wants to take it back to drawing so he can continue experimenting, continue probing the possibility of an idea like this. And of course he's able to see this motif in a completely new light, because by taking an impression like this, what you do, as happens with a print, is you reverse the image. So you're seeing this motif in a completely new way, or seeing new possibilities for it with the composition reversed. Now, if that already sounds like quite a complex process for Watteau, things get more complex still, because there are several of these oil counterproofs survive. Most of them relate to one picture by Watteau, L'amour, the so-called L'amour paisible, in Berlin. And the assumption for a long time was that these drawings, we've got one, the Fitzwilliam, we've got another, were taken from that painting. But there are slight differences in detail, and the canvas weave doesn't match. So presumably what we have here is another painting. Okay, so we've got the drawings going back and forth between study, this lost painting, back onto paper, and then there's this version in Berlin. So you've almost got this tennis rally of this motif going back from paper to paint to paper again, and presumably back to paint after that. And what it really shows is just the sheer experimentalism, the creativity, the willingness of Watteau to explore ideas, which for me completely explains why he doesn't produce a picture like the Pilgrimage of Kythera for so long, because he's continually, rather like Parmigianino, just constantly getting curious about the potential of an idea. And I include this in a section, or part of my section, about showing Watteau building up this large corpus of drawings next to other instances of him experimenting as a way of expanding the number of ideas at his disposal, and that includes unusual techniques and also more conventional counterproofs.
Which is, I mean, it's really exciting, because I think people think of counterproofs, well, it's not the thing, it's a reverse image of the thing, and so there's a tendency to not include them unless they're extremely important ones. We once did a show for Stockholm, and we included Tessine's counterproof of Watteau's sheet of the Three Heads of a Void, because it is the counterproof of such a superstar. But you often don't get that, and then there's also the fear of, is this too complicated to explain? But I think that our work is expanding more to acknowledge that the public finds these outliers or these quirky things interesting, as long as they're in balance with some of the more iconic works that give a broader sense of the artist, but then a little more, these types of works that give a sense of method and thought, even if as a standalone drawing, they're not a masterpiece.
And I think when you're in a long sequence of drawings, as we have in our Gallery 90 show, to have that variety, to have novelty, to have Watteau doing different things, but can become quite useful.
Yeah, no, you had a number of black chalks that kind of, brought in, and I think that's true in Chantilly too, because you had a number of the ones that really, brought in different media or different combinations of media that give a sense also of visual variety, because that is another one of the challenges. But having the paintings also, the small scale paintings to compare them to, created an excitement, I think, across media. And also I think at Chantilly, the juxtapositions, to see a work that inspired Watteau to make a copy after an old master and then use that figure in his own composition. Some of those clusters that you showed, that you put together, I think did that visually. You could read the labels, you don't have to. You can absolutely follow what has happened here.
Thank you.
And I think that's a good kind of storytelling there.
That was really fun. That was a fun thing to do. When we first started working on L'amour des armées, so the one with Venus that I showed earlier, I was like, okay, we have two shots. One, getting the Louvre drawing. B, getting the private collection in Switzerland drawing, we need them both. For the narrative to be complete on the wall,
Yeah.
we really need them both. And looking at the way it's been installed, when I first saw the show, like during the installation, I was like, okay, we've done it right.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
works.
That they come
Like, it's
together, it
clear.
tells it
Yeah.
visually for those
Yeah.
who don't want to.
And I think it's probably circling back to your question about the audience. When putting things together as scholars and knowing the material that we're working on, there's this thing of like, how are we going to create that moment where the people are not just going to look at things, but go closer and look at the label?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think it's not a given that people are going to read the labels, right?
Yeah.
So when you put things on the wall, like what effect are you looking for, and what does it have to be strong? Does it have to be intriguing? And I think the oil counterproof has kind of that. It's strong and intriguing. So I guess people were like, oh, okay.
Yeah, it makes you curious.
Yeah.
What is this
What
one
is
different?
that?
I'm
Like,
gonna
and then you get to read the
closer to
label.
it.
And that's what we wanted to do with the All Masters, because when you look at the room on its own, there are, I think, 2 or 4 sets, 3 sets, 3 complete sets with the original in the copy, and the use of the copy that is lost. So there's this thing of like, we have those strong cases where people understand the general narrative,
Mhm.
and then they can go look at one drawing that doesn't have the original next to it,
Yeah.
but they get what it's seeing, and
Yeah.
like you've created something in people's mind.
Yeah, this understanding of process, and you've done it
Absolutely.
visually.
Yeah.
So as you've wrapped up work on this, and the BM show is fortunately open through the summer, sorry, I keep pressing the wrong button there. I wanna know what you both think, in terms of next steps in the field of the study of Watteau's drawings. Grant, your lead time for this installation was not long, but you've uncovered a lot of interesting new observations about the BM's collection. Where does that go for you?
Well, little nuggets here and there, and I think if one wanted to wrap them up in a word, it would probably be looking at the materiality, looking at the archaeology of the drawings, because traditional approaches tend to, and this is absolutely true of Italian drawings as well, look at drawings as repositories of ideas, and not so much as three-dimensional objects with a history, which explains an awful lot of why they look the way they do. And the interesting little nuggets that have come out of this shows are things like that London watermark, which maybe in the past wasn't the sort of thing that people necessarily picked up on, but actually becomes quite significant. Also little things like looking at chain lines on drawings and working out, because a lot of Watteau drawings have clearly been cut up, looking at seeing whether 2 surviving fragments were indeed one part of the same sheet.
Yeah, we do love to say,
Yes.
oh, these could have been part of the same shoot.
Yeah.
That's speculation,
Yeah.
but we actually have the means, if
Yes,
we can convince
absolutely.
our conservation
Yeah.
labs.
So I think, and particularly when we have fragments that have the same route to the BM, that's when one really thinks there is a high chance
These
that they
stay
have.
together.
And because Watteau so loves to create dialogues between different sketches on one sheet, he's almost searching for the kernel of a dramatic narrative, of a story between the different figures. Put on a sheet, actually that can be quite useful. Well, it'd be useful anyway, but it could be especially useful if you can imagine drawings that have been catalogued differently belonging on one sheet of paper.
Wow, yes, then we'll have to revisit the dating of them. And how about you, Axel? Where do you see, I mean, the catalog that was produced for Chantilly is wonderful, because there's a whole wealth of new information and summaries of recent scholarship by a wide range of scholars, including many young scholars, which I think is incredibly promising, and having a fresh take on this material. Where do you see this going next?
Well, you said it. We talked about it when we were in the show, and like I think materiality is the next step. It's necessary. When you look at the catalogue raisonné, which is not so old, it's 1996.
Yeah,
so,
thank you.
I mean,
it's like
seriously,
yesterday, but
like,
you know.
Materiality, really, watermarks, understanding the paper, the material, the chalks, the use of counterproof too. I think they've been clearly overlooked. Just Rosenberg and Pratt just mentioned them in passing sometimes, and they reproduce the counterproof only when the original drawing's not known. But,
Yeah,
like,
yeah, because they're sort of
either it's
lesser,
drawing or not.
yeah.
There's this thing that you can't like decide it's a drawing when you want it to be what the drawing, and not decide it's a drawing when it's not good for you. Like either you catalog them really and like consider them as a replication process
Yeah.
or conservation. I mean, there are many elements that have been developed in recent years that I'm sure they were both aware of, but the perception that they had by then was, and also the art market also was really different. I guess all of that together kind of pushed them not to work so much on materiality,
Mhm.
but at the end of the day, I think Grant is absolutely right. That's the next step, like looking
Yeah,
at all
I
the
mean, which
traces
is
in the
easier when you're
paper.
at an institution and you have the material
Yeah.
there and your colleagues there, whereas
Yeah.
when you're putting together a catalog across so many institutions, trying to get everyone to investigate them on your timetable. So it's good to have, access to private collections where, some of that can be done, because a lot of those then are new to the literature or were not known in the same way,
Yeah.
like these two small drawings to literature.
Yeah.
And there's one outlet I might suggest as we bring this panel to a close, and I would be remiss to not mention Master Drawings Journal, which is a co-sponsor with Trois Crayons in this panel, and at which I am an associate editor, to say that we've got a very deep bench in articles on Watteau, and I was looking the other day, and the journal's first issue appeared at the start of 1963, and it was the first issue of 1964 that had an article on Watteau by Martin Heidelberg. So just right in there once there was a new outlet, even at a time where there was stiff competition from the Gazette des Beaux-Arts and other outlets that are no longer with us. But you could see over the years from Meg, who's our deputy editor, as well as Martin, David, and articles by Axel around Watteau as well, on Lancret and Pater, and so Grant, when you get to the time to sit down and start writing about this late drawing and its watermark and his period in London, very naturally, I would say, keep Master Drawings in mind. And you see a drawing that David Pullins had discovered in the Musée des Arts Décoratifs and attributed to Watteau in 2014. So the discoveries keep coming, it keeps expanding our knowledge, and even when there's not a catalog, there's a place for this to live. And at the Journal, we're very committed to continuing that tradition and being very receptive to new approaches, I think, in scholarship that come out of projects like this, like the discovery made after, you were mentioning, after the show closes, it's not in your catalog, but you finally figure out the subject of this drawing, and then the Tessine connection with the Titian. There is still a vehicle for putting that out into the world, so it adds to the larger knowledge of Watteau. But I want to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon, for managing to get here through the crowds in the wonderful celebration outside. It's a great opportunity to have been able to celebrate Watteau on Pride Day nonetheless. And Grand Show is still up at the BM, so I would say, if it gets any hotter again, it's a great place to spend an afternoon.
Cool off.
Yes. Very cool. But also what I loved about both these shows is that they were very containable. They weren't these sort of very long rambles, but they were timed in a way you could keep the thread together and really emerge with a feeling for Watteau that didn't answer every question but raised some new ones. And I congratulate you both. It's been a hell of a year for both of you and for Watteau. So please join me in giving a hand for Grant and Axel.